Welcome to C.O.R.E Conversations, a City of North Mankato podcast. Join the conversation to learn what's at the core of North Mankato.
Welcome back again to our second episode of C.O.R.E Conversations. This is a podcast put on by the City of North Mankato. I'm your host, Mayor Scott Carlson, and we are excited today to have two historians from North Mankato. To my right, we have Rich O'Brien. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for being with us today. And to my left, we have Tom Hagen.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here also, Mr. Hagen.
Not a problem.
As we get started, one thing I want to do is I want the listeners and the viewers really to know a little bit about each of you, your background, how long you've been in North Mankato, and a little bit of your personal history. So maybe we'll start with Rich. I've known Rich forever. He's been at our church for a long time, and my father affectionately calls him Obi-Wan. And so he's just a wealth of knowledge. And so why don't you give us a little bit about your background, family history in North Mankato?
My connection with North Mankato started probably going back to 1942, which is close to ancient Rome, I know, but my family moved from the cities down to North Mankato area. My mom and dad started a bakery delicatessen catering business, and I was 9 years old, and they dumped me in the laps of the Notre Dame nuns and got raised by them. We lived in North Mankato. I lived in Mankato for 1 year, then moved to Weaver Avenue from there on. And so I graduated from Loyola in 51 and got my degree in teaching from MSU, University of Minnesota, and MSU. I did a couple of stints in the Army, saving our country, and got a job in McGregor, Iowa for 2 years, then got an invitation to teach here in Mankato, and I've been here ever since. Retired taught at pretty much the east side of town at Franklin and Mankato East, and retired 23 years ago from Mankato East, and I've been doing very little since, enjoying nothingness. And so I've been around the area, I guess, for, you might say, most of my life.
Well, it's a long time. And I mean, Rich says, I've done nothingness since he retired. He kind of, it's tongue in cheek because he's about as active as they come in the public and visiting and social circles and things like that, right? I mean,
I guess.
So you are busy.
I major in coffee shops now.
That's true. Tom, how about yourself? A little bit of your history and background in North Mankato.
Well, Richie has a few years on me. I've only lived in North Mankato for 55 years. I came in 1971 and purchased a house. I spent 30 years as a public school teacher in a variety of small rural schools. And then the last 15 years, I taught as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Minnesota Mankato as in the humanities department. During the times I was working on that particular career, I also restored 5 historic properties in the North Mankato area, 4 in North Mankato, 1 in Mankato. And I retired last year, actually. So this is my first year of retirement, and I'm working now to see if I can get the City of North Mankato to establish a historic preservation commission so we might preserve and protect our architectural heritage.
Yeah, you've got some passions there with history and architecture and plants and things like that. So, I mean, obviously now you've got a background of the two of my bookends here, and we've got a lot of knowledge. So let's kind of move on a little bit about kind of then and now, kind of where when you moved here, when you were growing up, like what was it like then? What was North Mankato like, and kind of moving into sort of what it's like now? I mean, it doesn't have to be a story necessarily per se, but just kind of your view.
I was kind of thinking that question over, And I came to one conclusion, that probably the biggest advancement, you might say, or when I see North Mankato really taking off and changing. When I was a kid growing up, we had one bridge between the two towns, and that was always a point of contention of what the railroad was going to do. Were you going to be able to cross the bridge, going to Mankato or not? And that picture was pretty well framed for us by the one guy that was occupant of one little shelter, you might say, a little hut on the Mankato side of the bridge, and it was his job to come out with his stop sign if there's a train coming within, I don't know what distance, to come out and hold up his sign and stop traffic.
Really?
And the traffic would stop, and then you would mutter to yourself, and then the traffic would back up on the bridge behind you, and obviously the Mankato side also. So that was always I remember, though, coming home one night from Mankato, and there are 4 or 5 of us guys, and one of us, without naming anyone, one of us jumped between the 2 railroad cars. Whoa. While they were moving. And we just our eyes kind of popped, and he stood on the other side then, Googling us, and kind of daring us to follow suit. No way. But he jumped between the cars and made it.
Oh, my goodness.
I don't know if that put him into heroic status or not. But that, then adding the North Star Bridge and I call it what's the other bridge? Upriver, the North Bridge.
Oh, you got the Highway 14 bridge, the 14 bridge, yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to add those two, now that we have, it's like we have arrived with modern civilization, right, by adding these 2 bridges. What a difference it does make.
So that's a big one for you. I mean, just that progress from that lone bridge, and I remember it as that flat bridge going straight across, and it was so flood prone, and I do remember having to stop for those trains a little bit, and then getting that arched that new Veterans Bridge was like, that was the biggest marvel ever. We could kind of go over the top of the trains and not have to stop.
One thing we did do, that was a cement bridge eventually. It was a steel frame bridge, I guess, when my mom was growing up years ago. Then they made a cement bridge out of it. And I do remember one game we did play, if you call it a game, we would, as crazy kids, go underneath the framework of the bridge and either get pigeon eggs or squab. And the prize was squab, because you could take them home and cook them. And you think, now, what the heck were we thinking? But the other good thing, we would find out when the Mankato cops would come out on the bridge with their shotguns and shoot pigeons. I thought that was quite a game. You join the police force just to shoot pigeons. But they would shoot pigeons from the bridge, standing on the bridge.
Really?
And to kind of cull the herd of pigeons, and they bang away, and the poor pigeon birds would flop away down in the water, drifting to New Orleans. But the bridge was sort of a item of hindrance, I think, for North Mankato growth, that effect.
I have to ask, because you referenced pigeon, did you say eggs? Or you said squab.
Squab.
Squab. So what's squab?
Baby pigeons.
The baby pigeons are squab. See, I didn't know that. There you go. I'm
And
learning.
I never took one home, but suppose some kids, they took. Yeah, we had fried squab last night.
Fried squab.
Guys, yuck. But we had to limit the number of pigeons, that fly around. They do their thing on the silos now. You can see them up there.
I got to ask, and this, I don't know when they started and stopped. Do you have is there any memory or reference to like when the riverboats were coming up to Mankato? Were you at all, was that before or after? And how was it? I mean,
Richie's not quite that old, are you, Richie?
No, but did you have any, was there talk about that still? Did they still do any kind of like a symbolic, like a run up the river for just, any kind of
Well, I have a story about that. The last boat to come up the river was the Julia, 1868. And there was a great bend in the Minnesota River that turned to come into North Mankato. And on top of the hill above that bend was the Adam Jefferson House, which is now in North Mankato on Lake Street. And they would toot their horn as they came around that bend to let people in Mankato know they were ready to come into the docks. Well, the Julia went aground right below Jefferson's Bend, and the ship sank. And they had to unload all the cargo, and it was the very last ship because in 1868, the first train came through Mankato, and now all goods would come by train. No need for river traffic anymore. And Adam Jefferson had a daughter born to him at that time in 1868, and he named her Julia after the boat that ground at that location. And it laid there in the river for probably 15 years till it completely rotted away, and nobody ever bothered to move it because there was no need to do so. But that was the last boat, and it was a little before Richie's time.
Yeah. I mean, I see pictures. I don't have that historical frame of reference, but I mean, the pictures sometimes make it look like it wasn't. I mean, they maybe still brought them, maybe a symbolic kind of trip up or whatever. I wasn't sure.
Well, stuff went back and forth. Yeah. One of the interesting stories is that when the boat came up, once that whistle blew, and the kids in school at the location on Broad Street heard the whistle, they ran out of the classrooms. Teachers could not keep them in the classroom because when the boat came up to the docks, they were paid 10 cents to help unload the boats and then to load cut wood to go back up to St. Paul from the dock. And so they loaded and unloaded the boats, the children from the school district, for 10 cents each. And and the ship returned with the wood, which is what we had to return to St. Paul.
The first boat in Mankato, I think, was called the Henrietta.
That's correct.
All right. A story about that is right now there is a statue of a 14, 15-year-old Indian boy in the first story of the Brennan building. All right.
Yeah.
The statue was made by a fellow by the name of John K. Daniels 100 years ago in 1923 to turn to bronze and sold to whatever for the Mayo Foundation thing. Okay. And the Indian statue is white fine cement, all right, but he is facing the river. And his hands are up as though he were taking a sip of water out of a stream. When we took that statue and placed it where it is, in that entryway to the Brennan building, was David Braveheart, who is now passed, but he was very active in the local Lakota Dakota people.
Yeah.
I was standing next to him, and there's a plaque on the wall there that what he is turning and looking at was the whistle, maybe, or the unloading of the Henrietta.
Oh.
And my comment to him was, and ever since that whistle, what he's looking at, his name was Huxita, which is Indian boy in Lakota. His life has changed from that whistle on. And this fellow turned and looked at me, and And he said, "You can say that again." Because, yes, the life of those people
Right.
completely changed.
Completely
See,
changed, yep.
Once that whistle unloaded its cargo.
It's cargo, right? Yeah, that's interesting, and that's the reason we've got both of you here. It's fun to see this like tennis match going back and forth. We got a story, and then that brings me up to the statue or that in that building. I
just invite people to go down there and take a glance, because as he sits in the burning building at nighttime, there is a beam of light, and he's a perfectly white statue. To me, it's rather a stunning.
That's pretty cool
thing to have.
One of those things, just to kind of guide us a little different in another direction. Either one of you can chime in here. What are some of those places in North Mankato of importance that maybe made an impact on you or the city that you just kind of? It could be places that maybe are no longer there, unfortunately. It could be places that are there now, maybe that you might go by and not even know that's what that was. I mean, is there something that rings a bell to either one of you?
Think of anything, Tom?
Oh, yeah, very clearly. So I brought some artifacts along today to take a look at this situation.
Perfect.
So we go back to the early history of North Mankato. A guy named Philip Hodap, along with 6 other settlers, came up the Missouri River, down the Missouri actually, to the Mississippi, came up the Mississippi to St. Paul, and eventually made their way to Mankato in 1854. 7 of the early settlers, 3 of them had families, went through some terrors along the way. They got here in October, and there were 4 log huts in 1854. That was Mankato, nothing on the North Mankato side. A few years later, his younger brother, a guy named Wendell Hodap, who had trained to be a druggist, followed him to Mankato. And he would be here at the time of the Dakota Uprising, and in fact witnessed the hanging. And founded a drugstore, which was on Front Street, right, where the American State Bank once stood. There's a picture of his drugstore with the name on it, W. Hodap, and him standing out in front, and made his initial income that way.
Check that out.
He got married, had a young family, and was looking for a place to live, of course. He wasn't a farmer. His brother, who had come first, Philip, took farmland north of town, which became the Mankato Golf Club, actually. That's the property. Wendell found a piece of property on the North Mankato side of the river. In 1877, he crossed the river at Cummings Ferry in Sibley Park and walked along the bluff looking for a place to buy. And there was still a property for sale in North Mankato that no one had taken up, oddly enough, in 1878. And the reason they didn't was because much of North Mankato at that time was marshland. Yeah. And it was prone to flooding. And it was grapevines and willows and not much to offer for a farmer. But this guy didn't want to farm. He's looking for a housing site. So he walked on the bluff, and he found 4 things that he was looking for. First, he walked past what became Nelson's Quarry. He saw the stone outcropping, foundation material. Walked a little further, and he found a bench along the bluff that provided some flat property where one could build a house above the floodplain. And on the hillside behind that house was a natural spring that would have provided fresh water to the house. And at the end of what's now Cornelia Street, he found a pit of suitable clay for making brick. So he went back to the land agent and purchased the property, which had been originally a grant to a War of 1812 soldier. So here's the actual piece of property. You can do that?
Yep.
That's signed by President James Buchanan in 1858. And he immediately sold the property, and his name was Bernard Kohler. So that property then came to a land agent here, and my great-great-grandfather, Wendell Hodap, bought the property and proceeded to build a house on the terrace overlooking North Mankato. Now, this would allow him to own literally 160 acres of what is now North Mankato. Wow. So this larger map, if you want to hold this up, shows the property. So we take a look at this. This is North Mankato about 1905. Wendell Hodap owned all of this property, the entire north end of town, 160 acres. and slowly would sell off parcels of that property. His house was located here, just across from Spring Lake Park. He would make the lake, drill an artesian well that would create that body of water, because that was not there originally. And the first lot he sold off was to a little carpenter named Nils Du Bois. That's how they pronounced his name at the time. And he would build a small house to the north of Wendell's house, and that's the house I currently live in.
That's impressive.
So here's a picture of Wendell's house as it looked in 1890, and in the background you can see Spring Lake, the original Lake Street, which went to St. Peter, and the so-called mansion house that he built for himself, and he's sitting out in front with a couple of his children. Large garden, an orchard. It was a gentleman farm. So he made his money as a druggist and just lived here as a gentleman farmer.
Now, give me a little more clear view of that, though. That's this house would be located where? That's Spring
Okay, so
Lake,
this is still Lake Street.
Yeah,
but
that's Lake Street.
The city of North Mankato's cut Lake Street down by about 30 feet over several gradings.
Sure.
You can see the lake out here in front.
Mm-hmm.
So this direction is north, and the house faced west.
Wow.
And this part of the house still remains. The bottom half of the house, they tore the second floor off, the porches, the bays, and all of this. And you can tell the house because there are stone or brick coins at the corners, which still are exposed.
And that's there on Lake Street today.
Still on Lake Street today, the remnants of the house, right. If you go down the basement, the ceilings are 10 feet high of limestone, big arches.
Well, that's, I mean...
So that's the rather interesting history. Now, the last thing he did, of course, was make the lake. And he did that by figuring out that there was a hard pan layer of clay some feet down below North Mankato, and that the old area that we call Swan Lake on top of the hill, which was probably the largest freshwater marsh in North America, was feeding that aquifer. Yeah. So when he drilled a hole and punched through that clay, it shot water up 8 feet in the air and made a spring, which filled the lake. And people for 60 years came and drew water from. And I have a picture of the spring here, which you will find interesting, perhaps, as well.
That would be that artesian spring.
The artesian spring. So here's Wendell and his hired man, Peter Newbert. The house is in the background, and we see the winter scene of all the ice surrounding the spout of the water that shot into the air.
That is just, isn't that just amazing?
Now, that is the beginning of Mud Lake.
Yes. And it was originally called Mud Lake because of the fact that it was kind of a damp, marshy spot that sometimes filled in with water in the spring. The lake then was really formed by the artesian well, and it was referred to as Hodap's Lake at that time in the 1880s and 90s, and eventually became Spring Lake because, of course, the spring fed it.
And as a youngster in North Mankato, of course, that was our swimming pool.
Yes.
And we would go down there and swim in it, but you wouldn't swim in it. You'd walk out in about knee-deep full of mud.
Yeah.
It'd be on the north side of the lake. But
ever get bit by a turtle out there?
I was going to say, is that pre-snapping turtles or what?
We wondered about that. But we reverently today, amongst the old ones that are still around, that's still Mud Lake.
Oh, yeah.
See? But really, it should be, as it is, Spring Lake, because that's its beginning.
Now, interestingly enough, being a druggist, Mr. Hodap wrote a comment about this spot, and it really almost could be written today. I just put a few lines of it together that'll indicate what he thought of this spot. He says, too much work, too much food, and too little exercises cause 4/5 of all disease. A daily early walk in the country, far enough to get really tired, will bring you back the right spirit, energy, and health. If you're not feeling fit, take a long walk, say towards Hodap's Lake. After resting, drink freely of the water from the artesian well and stroll home tired and happy. After breakfast, you will realize the benefit derived.
Okay, what would it take then today to bring the artesian back to that neighborhood?
In 1960, my grandfather, at behest of his wife, who was a daughter of Wendell Hodap, wanted to start that artesian well back up. It was still there, but it was basically seeping. It was only putting out maybe about an inch or so of water out of the head. So they came in and they drilled deeper, hoping to be able to tap a deeper aquifer, and they couldn't find anything. And of course, on top of the hill, the old aquifer that had produced all this water had been drained, tiled, and farmed. So not as much water was entering into the system. And of course, wells were being drilled that cities took their drinking water from. So they gave it up at that point. So you would never be able to get this kind of flow again. But the well is still there, buried under the dirt of Spring Lake Park, and it's tiled out to the lake. So the seepage is actually feeding Spring Lake.
Okay, now where's the artesian, the spout of water, located?
Well, I'm the only person that can still find it for you. I can take you down to Spring Lake Park and show you the spot.
It's secret.
It's been buried.
You have to be
they put
blindfolded.
dirt over it and just put grass on top of it.
Yeah.
But that is, I thought it was on the southwest corner of the lake.
Southwest corner. Yep.
Last time we did swim in the lake, we got kicked out. Some guy was in a canoe on the south side of the lake. Hey, you kids, get out of there, yelling at us. We found out later who it was. He was in a canoe.
Who was it?
Harvey Anderson.
Oh, yes.
And of course, he was a big, imposing fellow.
Yeah.
And he kicked us out. We never went back.
Harvey Anderson owned the property.
Yes.
The city, that's a very interesting story you would bring up. Wendell Anderson offered, the city has made a couple mistakes, sorry, but you weren't around for it.
No.
In 1912, Wendell Hoodap offered Spring Lake to the city of North Mankato for nothing, free. All they would have to do is dredge the lake a little bit to put some fish in it and use the dredgings to make a path so people could walk around the lake.
And get the mud out of there.
Yes, and he gave it to them for nothing.
Yeah.
And they met and they discussed and they couldn't come to a conclusion, and they finally decided, no, it's too much upkeep. And so they decided not to take the offer. 2 years later, the same offer was made and it was turned down again. The city in 1942 would buy Spring Lake from Harvey Anderson for $250,000.
Wow. Then Harvey built a ski hill.
Yes,
So yeah, Harvey was a legend himself there.
of course.
All right, we removed ourselves to a different swimming venue. The gang of guys in
Really?
North, the young,
Inniker
young
Pond.
fellas.
We can talk about this?
Oh, yes, we can.
I'm just
Sort of.
making sure.
I'll blank out some of it. But we would not, just a matter of pride, go out to Turtle Lot Park. That was the Mankato pool.
Yes, yeah.
We had a better pool of water. If you go down, is it Cornelia?
Yeah.
All the way down, keep going, past the hockey rink.
Yes.
Yep.
Keep going,
Yep,
keep going,
keep going.
through the sand brushes and the willows, and we find a very nice sandy beach down next to the river. And that became our swimming pool for 2 or 3 years as we grew up and survived.
So bring up my big map and I can show you that spot where Richie went.
Yeah, I got it.
Because part of it still exists.
Is this pre-rerouting of the river, or is this?
So what Richie's talking about, you can't see the rest of this river here, but it used to run like this in a big loop.
Yep.
All right. So as Richie went down the street this way, he came to the old oxbow that was the lake and the old sandbar that was on the edge of that, and that's where they swam, in that oxbow.
Okay, some of the guys would do that, but that did not have the current go the other direction
Down here?
into Mankato.
Yes.
Yeah. And across from that, of course, was the water tower for the steam engines on the Mankato side.
Yeah. Yep.
So that was all through brush and willows and stuff. Past the hockey rink time.
Yeah.
You picked that out?
The hockey rink? I don't
Yeah.
think I know where that was, Rich.
It was on Cornelia beyond Nicollet.
Yeah, so Cornelia is, on this one, it's still not listed at this time. There wasn't a
Okay.
Cornelia Street, but it's up in this neighborhood, right here.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, it was down by the river.
Well, it went all the way down.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's somewhere down here.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what
All
you're
right.
talking about.
We would go down there, and that's where we'd swim in the river. Nice sandy beach.
Yep.
And what was fun about it, Well, two things. We were guys, of course. Yeah. Women not allowed. We were buck naked when we swam in it, which was interesting. But what was fun is that you'd get in and the water was quiet. And then you could see it right in front of you, the current. And as soon as you hit that current, the way you'd go. So our rules were, when you go in, always face straight ahead. So you get swimming, you'd be going sideways, but toward the opposite bank. Rule number 1. Rule number 2, keep your mouth shut, because there was affluence moving down the river from the cities upriver. Little logs would be coming down and little clouds of fluff.
Are these, I'm not going to go there. The logs as in like wood? This is wood logs?
No, they were about 6-8 inches long, made of brown.
Well, we'll go much further than that, but I can see why you'd want your mouth shut.
Floating on top of the water.
Is this the secret to your 90 years, Richie?
This is, yeah. But it was open sewage, too. So one time, and we'd go down there, we'd swim down there 4, 5, 8 times a summer, and we had a lot of fun. Only guys, of course, because I won't tell you what we called the place, but it wasn't nice. But anyway.
That might be for the next episode.
Yeah. So we built a tower down there out of the willow woods in the woods.
Yeah.
That was higher than what Turtlehead had. And we were very proud of that, because he'd jump off, and a lot of fun. So we had a pet bulldog. He just belonged to no one. He was just to all of us. His name was Buster. So we thought it'd be a lot of fun to take Buster on top of this tower, and 1, 2, 3, we grabbed his front leg, his hind legs, and tossed him out. And boom, splash. He went through the air with his legs up, and whatnot. He never came up.
What?
He never came up. And we thought, he's a bulldog. He bit the bottom and wouldn't let go. He wouldn't come up. All of a sudden, downriver, and he was for quite a while. Psh, psh, psh. We saw Buster made it. He was spitting out of what he had for a nose. He was spitting water out of all the water he took in as he was, But Buster made it to shore. Now he came to shore, and we came Buster, and Buster was no dumbbell. He thought, these guys are going to do it again. He remembered the fellow that had a hold of him.
Yeah.
Would have nothing to do with that guy from that time on.
That was it.
Buster. But anyway.
Poor Buster.
Buster. He was a smart dog. But we were very proud of that water tower set up.
All right. Well, that's pretty cool. So we got some of that. How about move on to maybe people of interest? How about we've got any people? You mentioned Harvey Anderson kicking you. Hey, get out of the mud, swimming hole or whatever. Do you have any other interesting people? Older adults you met up with, or maybe friends you maybe hung out with that people may even know today that were interesting characters or figures from North Mankato then?
Well, a lot of them are now gone to Happy Hunting Ground there by this time. We had two categories of kids, male and female, when we were growing up. You were either a Catholicer or a potlicker. And, of course, the Catholicers went to Holy Rosary. They were Catholic. Yeah. The potlickers were Protestant. And we pretty well kept separated.
Really?
And once in a while, we needed someone. We'd play ball, pickup game, and if we needed someone, and here came a potlicker walking by, we'd say, hey, come on and fill in for us for a while. And I look back on that, and my gods, but we were both schools were well indoctrinated religious background. But
Do you remember old John Coppin?
oh yes.
Have any stories about him?
Yeah.
I didn't. I just knew him as a very small kid. We'd go on Sunday morning after church. We'd have to head to North Mankato to buy our vegetables from John, or seedlings to put in your garden.
Yeah.
And all I can remember is standing behind that counter of sort he had in that ramshackle barn, and he'd be talking to a customer, and just in an instant he'd turn around and spit a stream of tobacco into a jar on the floor behind him. And we just thought that was unbelievable because he always hit the can every time. We'd stand and just watch and wait for it.
Did you ever see that, Rich?
Oh,
Did you ever see that?
my dad, no, but my dad would say, he'd send me down to Coppin Gardens and get some vegetables. He'd call up and make an order. And the vegetables, they were very fresh because he just went out and back there and picked these things, whatever it was.
Well, his garden ran right down to the river. He took the water out of the river to water the garden, but it was just a long stretch of property that went all the way to the river.
So we have Coppin Gardens. Where was his?
Well, John's house was right there. Now, sadly, it's one of the 3 historic brick buildings in North Mankato that have been torn down in the last 15 years.
Sure.
It should have been saved, but it's now a parking lot.
Yep.
If you go to the site of the old house, the stone lintels that were part of the house are still in a pile out there in front of us. Yeah.
Well,
talk about brick houses.
yeah.
Yep.
And there are 2 houses on Wheeler Avenue in the 300 block that are completely made of red brick. How come?
Well, there are more than 2.
Yeah, there are more than 2.
In 1982, the Nicollet County Historical Society went through and documented 44 houses of historic interest in North Mankato made of the local brick. And that's because we had an early brickyard in Mankato. Wendell Hoodapp made the first brick out of that place on Cornelia Street. And then a guy named Wheeler and Mr. Bennett went into business together and opened a brickyard. And to this day, if you go to Wheeler Park, you'll notice when you go to Wheeler Park, it's depressed. It's about 2 or 3 feet lower than the rest of the area. And that's because that's where they dug the clay.
Yes.
And made the brick.
Well, it's interesting because I remember when I got my teaching job at Monroe Elementary, I learned a lot about the floods, and I learned a lot about Tanley Field formerly being on where I teach now. But I remember digging a few trees to plant some new trees on the property, and I'm like, what am I digging up here? I'm running into some rock or something, and I dug up a brick. And back then, Steve Miller, our Monroe historian, is like, well, that's the old brickyard down there at Wheeler. I'm like, and this makes sense. I started researching a little bit about that, but you can still dig up bricks.
Now, the reason for all the brick houses in North Mankato was until 1880, there was no bridge across the river. The first bridge, the Iron Bridge, went in 1880. So all goods had to be carried across the river on a ferry boat.
Yeah.
You could not load a wagon with brick and put them on a ferry boat without having the thing tip over going across the river. So that was a building material that was used only in North Mankato. You could buy a dozen brick for a penny.
Yeah.
So everybody built out of brick, which is one of the unique aspects of lower North Mankato.
No, that depression is... We used to use that. We skated on that. They'd flooded it.
Yep.
And that was our skating pond in the wintertime.
Yep.
And
now, just across from the Wheeler Park is a school building.
Yeah.
And that building is where Mr. Stewart had his brickyard. And it, too, was a depression. But when they built the school, they dug all the dirt out of the basement and used it for fill.
Yes.
So that's why that area is level, whereas across the road, it's a depression.
Well,
but let me just talk a little bit about that skating pond. There were 2 places we could skate, but we couldn't during World War II because one was a hockey rink, and those guys, of course, were in the service, so they didn't keep that up. That was the hockey club. Mm-hmm. But where Wheeler Park is now, that dip, that depression, that was flooded by the city, and man, there might have been 100, 110, 120 kids down there of all ages and abilities to skate down there. And I remember the warming house, that the guy that kept that, his name was Van. Van was an elderly fellow. It was a pot-belly stove, and if you were a real idiot, you'd put your skates up against that pot-belly stove to warm your feet. You dumb nut. That ruined the iron in the skates.
Yeah.
But part of the fun, okay, I can say this, okay. Part of the fun of skating down there was crack the whip, a big game.
Oh, yeah.
15, 20 guys. Then later on, you had it, that was not allowed, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But at the end, when you were tired and time to go home, you take a look to see who was in the warming house with you. And there were, whether potluckers or catluckers, we were all together. There were some of the potluckers say that they were kind of cute. So the deal was, who was the guy, you were, let's say, 7th or 8th grade, who dared to go over and ask one of those girls if you could help taking her skates off.
Ooh.
That was really something.
I bet.
And she would say yes or something like that, you know. So you take her skates off. Then the epitome of it was, can I walk you home? That was just flutter, flutter, heart, heart.
Oh, I bet.
And this is Valentine's Day, you know.
That's right.
That was the real. And then you.
That was your version of the snowball skating world for me.
Then of course, then you'd get talked about. Did you see what Richie did? You know, and then, but it was a real privilege to walk home with one of those girls. You'd carry your skates, of course, like that. But that was quite a meeting.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Hey, you know, Tom did want me to bring up one extra thing for sure here about you know, the bakery. At least one thing, maybe another. But we talked early to start the cast about the bakery, the days with the bakery, and you're having to work. But there was some story about a death at the bakery.
Yes.
Death by mixer or something.
Yes.
You want to tell that story real quick?
That was in the Keene Bakery. My folks, their bakery, well, first of all, Keene Bakery was on the corner. I think maybe you just sort of pictured that.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the Keene Bakery, and they had a rotary bread mixer.
Oh, yep.
In 1937, the baker fell in, and it was...
The baker fell in?
The baker fell in. And those paddles...
Really?
Made of, not of wood, they were made of metal. And he, of course, got killed.
Whoa.
You can imagine what he looked like. Well, that thing ground him up. But
that was before safety switches or all that stuff, you know. Yeah. My goodness.
You know, whether he tripped or why he fell, no one knows, of course. There wasn't anyone around to tell the story. But they were the competitors of my mom and dad, or my grandma's bakery, delicatessen, 3 doors away, Page's Bakery. She built that building in 1923. And interesting thing about it, I think we alluded to it, that part of Belgrade Avenue was depressed.
Yeah.
And so she didn't have to dig a basement.
Mm-hmm.
She built the basement from that. And my dad said that, and I don't know how high it was, but when he grew up in North Mankato as a little kid, they'd go over there and get little sheets of cardboard and slide down that Belgrade Avenue depression. But yes,
there was that's a legit, and that's not me to be laughed at necessarily, but it's just like I'm like, somebody was killed by the mixer or that rotary mixer. That's kind of
one of the earliest deaths in North Mankato. Interesting. When I just got this information from the granddaughter not too many days ago, the first car accident in North Mankato. Do you know about that, Richie?
No.
First car accident that resulted in a fatality. Christmas morning, 1920.
Really?
Elise Weiss was the woman's name. She was walking to church, and she was run over by a taxi cab in the fog. It was a very foggy morning. He didn't see her. She was crossing the street, and Peter Sanger was the taxi driver.
Oh, man.
So we have our very first fatality in North Mankato in 1920.
Wow. I mean, that's
these are odd little things that nobody records, but it's kind of an interesting part of our history.
Can I tell you the first escape
Please do.
Having an accident in North Mankato?
An escape?
Your escape?
Uh-huh.
Uh-oh.
All right, this goes...
Is this are we past the statute of limitations now? So to make sure we don't have to call law enforcement after
Well, this is an absolutely true story. You wouldn't think I made it up, but this is an absolutely true story. The avenue out of North Mankato used to be not Lookout Drive, but Highway 14 went up
Belgrade Hill.
Belgrade Hill.
Yep.
All right. Very twisty and narrow.
Yeah.
In late 30s, WPA built Lookout Drive, and they misnomed it. It should have been Overlook Hill. So how did he get Lookout Drive? My story. Unbelievable that we survived. Accident. All right. Our gang of guys, there were 5 of us. We were about 13, 14, 15 years old. We would go camping, and Troop 77 had themselves a wagon, horse wagon, with a cover on it, like the settlers, you know. They'd put all their stuff in there. Okay, we said we should do that. Why don't we find ourselves a wagon and build ourselves?
Of course.
Something like that.
Yeah.
How old were you at the time?
13
years old,
Okay.
like that. Okay.
Right.
So we found a buggy, horse and buggy, a buggy out in Nicollet, Minnesota, up in an attic. So we went out there, negotiated, and bought the thing. It was a Studebaker buggy. It was one of the buggies you see in Gunsmoke, you know, with the big wheels and all that.
Really?
All right. So
I'm glad you said bought and negotiated. I thought I was like bought or stole, Rich. I wasn't quite sure back then.
Leave it up to yourself. Okay. He was glad to get rid of the wagon anyway. So we brought it back, took the seats off of it, and now it's a flat piece of wood. So we took the tongue off so we could steer it with ropes tied to the front axle. And we then would push. We'd load up all our tents, our camping gear.
Sounds very safe right
and
now.
we'd push it out the bottom road. And we were really kind of that historic feeling. So one evening, we said to ourselves, you know, I wonder what would happen. Wouldn't it be fun if we pushed that on the top of Lookout Drive and rode it down? Ah! So we had the imagination of thrill, being as old and mature as we were. We pushed our buggy to the top of Lookout Drive. There were 5 of us. Irv stood on the back axle. We tied the front axle to the ropes, and he tied the other ends of the ropes around his wrists, and he stood on the back axle. He was going to be the steerer. It was kind of like Ben-Hur, you know. That's what So we got going, 5 of us, up on top of Lookout Drive. We started going. We came to that first curve.
Oh, yeah.
God, we started picking up speed. Holy buckets. Slow down, slow down, slow down. We turned into the overlook thinking that would slow us down. 2 of the guys got off and stood on the back axles, dragging their feet. This is hurting our feet. So they jumped back on. We came out of the overlook. Now they had these are metal wheels. We came out of that overlook skidding. The sparks were flying. We slid all the way over to the other curb. Now, Irv was on top, you know, steering us. And then we skidded back to the other side of the road. And we probably did that a couple times. Here comes the car.
Oh, no.
Look out for the car. There were 2 cars. We skidded right between both of the cars, going back and forth, swerving. as we went up, look out for the car. Now that hill at the bottom used to curve Belgrade Avenue.
Yeah.
So we skidded sideways around that curve. Then the other curve, we skidded the other way around that curve. All of us just yelling, look out, look out. When we got to the bottom, there wasn't a sound except the wheels scraping and sparks flying. And we slowly came to a stop 2 blocks down Belgrade Avenue. So we were going maybe 35, 40 miles an hour.
At least, yeah.
And we slowed to a stop. Not a word was spoken. I looked. My dad was behind us in his car. And oh my gods, we're going to catch it. I got out, walked back to my dad. He rolled down the window. He looked at me and said, "That was quite a ride."
You were expecting a little more than that, weren't you?
It was behind us all the way. So the word, look out for the car, we just between those 2 cars. I thought, years later, I'm thinking, what were these 2 cars thinking as they were driving up Lookout Drive to see these kids coming or this buggy coming?
Yeah.
What did they go home and talk about that night?
If it happened today, Richard, you'd be in juvenile hall.
Yeah.
You do know.
We were lucky we weren't in the hospital or the morgue.
I'm sure you wore your helmets.
At any rate, that's how it should have been. It should be named Overlook Drive.
It should be named Overlook, but because we had to look out for the buggy.
Yes.
It's Lookout Drive.
Yeah.
I like it. Well, I gotta, we are gonna have to have you both back again because I think we've only scratched the surface, right? But yes. I do have a little parting question for you. Part of this podcast, it's going to explore so many avenues, and luckily with our 125th here, that we're going to get a lot of history this year from a variety of different guests, along with some other information. But just to kind of in closing, how would you describe North Mankato's community? Your maybe fondness for it and your memories. How would you, just in a couple sentences or just a few, some short words, how would you describe the community, both of you, that you've lived in for so many years?
Well, in my situation, I kept a very low profile, but I came to North Mankato from the Mankato side of the river because I was so distraught with urban renewal. And I came here because I felt that thing that people keep talking about all over the place, the small town feel. You drive down Belgrade Avenue, and it reminds one very much of Mayberry. People use that word if they don't remember Andy Griffith.
Yep, I do.
These are middle-class houses, not mansions, trees lining the street. It had a very welcoming feel. It was a small place, an intimate place, and it's been my attempt or my wish to preserve that. That's, I think, our most treasured aspect.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic, and it does get frustrating, when all of us have these visions of our community, what we want it to stay or be or whatever. But what a neat, vision of why you're here and what you want to do to help preserve it, right? How about you, Rich?
Well, I concur. I'd have to say definitely with Tom. I look back at where and what I grew up in. I consider to be extremely fortunate. And
yep.
We had our good times and our bad. We had our fights, definitely. But definitely a good place to grow up. And the Mayberry feel has disappeared a little bit, but that's still there. And I don't know, in bits and pieces. And my grandparents grew up on my boyhood home, where I lived in North Mankato, has been ripped down.
Yeah.
It's now a parking lot. So, but when I become famous and world renowned, North Mankato will not be able to say, "Oh, this is his boyhood home. Come and see it."
Right.
It's gone. No, but the guys I grew up with, some of them are still around, and the fun we had, I don't think it could be replicated in the Twin Cities.
Or even in today's world.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, it's difficult.
Yeah.
We lived at a very interesting time.
But I would like to say something at this
Yep.
point
Sure.
about Tom's venture on the west side of Mud Lake.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Tom has built some structures, people,
Yes.
on the west side of that lake. Well, 4 of them. Tom still lives in the old farmhouse that was there.
Mhm.
But the structures that are built there, from the log cabin to the Octo house, to me, I look at that, and most unusual, each one is a work of art.
Yes.
And what's really unusual is the Octo house. And I remember watching Tom over there with his hands, like, this guy's just crazy, with his own hands putting stones this big, one on top of the other. And what's amazing is they're all still standing.
So far.
So far.
Is that a compliment, or
I don't know if that's a more backhanded compliment, which is something you expect from
Rich
Richie.
did bring a few pictures, and I just in case we touched them and forgot to show them, he did bring a few pictures here, Rich.
Oh, yeah. Each one has a story.
Each one has a story.
Can we do that next time?
We can do it next time. So just to touch us, so this is giving you a little bit of part 2 here. So we do have a story here. It looks like we have some church, front of a church, and some
inside of the church.
Inside of a church. What church was that?
That was Holy Rosary.
Okay, so we're gonna have a little Holy Rosary story. So probably more about pot liquors and what was that one? What did you say?
Cat liquors.
Cat liquors and pot liquors. And then we got, looks like almost a lifeguard chair or some sort of a, is that another chair here too, right? What's that a picture?
It's not a chair.
It's not a chair. Looks like a chair to me.
You'll just have to tune in next time.
I'm excited for this.
I'm not going to tell you about it now.
All right, but we do have some pictures we didn't get. I was waiting to hear you talk about those, but we're going to get to those. So I think for sure, hopefully maybe later this spring we can have you back yet. We'll do part 2 here, but we don't want it to go too long. I do appreciate both of you joining us. I love hearing those stories. I think the viewers are gonna grab onto some of those stories and go, yeah, I remember some of those things too. I'm excited for that. I've said, some of these things like these local podcasts like this are hopefully like digital archives. When we're all gone someday, we all will be gone someday. We have some spoken and video recordings of these stories that are going to be here to last. That nobody can take back.
Well, we want to thank you as the mayor, Mr. Carlson, because you made this possible.
Well, thank you. Yeah,
thank you kindly.
Yeah, I love history. I love telling my stories of growing up in North Mankato, and it's great to hear your stories too. So we appreciate both of you, Rich O'Brien and Tom Hagen, for being on here today. We hope to have you back real soon. I don't know how many podcasts on there. We got a few things in the lineup, but we definitely have a few more stories. And knowing both of you, and as Rich being one of my dad's buddies too, I know there's way more stories to tell. So.
And Ann did not fall asleep.
No, Anna did not fall asleep. Thank you, Anna. Thank you again for joining us for C.O.R.E Conversations with the City of North Mankato. I'm your host again, Scott Carlson, your mayor. And thanks again, Tom and Rich, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
This has been C.O.R.E Conversations, a City of North Mankato podcast. For more information about city happenings, visit northmankato.com. Thanks for listening.